Slapstick humor, which British comic Benny Hill was known for, could make anyone laugh, no matter how serious they were. His charisma and one-of-a-kind comedic timing won over viewers all around the globe. But as people and #039's opinions evolved, the show came under fire for its use of controversial humor and its depiction of women. Insecurities and a severe phobia of spending money plagued Benny, even though he was a multi-millionaire. Wearing his garments out to the point of weariness, Benny would even glue the soles of his shoes back on when they fell free. Come along as we delve further into the impact of the Benny Hill Show. Originally from Southampton, England, Alfred Hill, better known as Benny Hill, came into this world on January 21. Was considered to be a class clown in 1925. He was performing popular songs for beachgoers and making money by the time he was 6 years old. He became a milkman after dropping out of school as a teenager, but he ultimately decided to seek a better life in London. There he was able to secure employment in the props department of a theater. When one actor passed out on stage from alcoholism, Hill landed a role because to the director and #039's admiration for his antics behind the scenes. Benny was trained as a mechanic and recruited to join the British Army in 1942 for World War II. In September 1944, he was a mechanic, lorry driver, and searchlight operator in the Normandy invasion. He later transitioned to the Combined Service Entertainment Division, where he provided entertainment for troops, sailors, pilots, and Marines. Benny chose to pursue a career in show business after seeing comedians perform in British music halls. In honor of fellow comic Jack Benny, he decided to go by the name Benny. After World War II, Benny Hill restarted his career into new heights with his October 5, 1947, radio show on Variety Bandbox and his 1950 television debut. For the years 1962 to 1963, he was the lead actor in the sitcom Benny Hill, in which he played a new role each week. He appeared in a television production of A Midsummer Night and #039's Dream that same year, 1964, playing the role of Nick Bottom, in which he acted out the part of an ass. His Benny Hill Time program ran from 1964 to 1966 and featured comedic sketches including Bond and the Beatles. Among Benny Hill and #039's 5 film appearances, Whodunit, Lit Up the Sky was released in 1956. Beginning in 1960 with Those Magnificent Men and Their Flying Machines and continuing through 1965 with Chitty Bang and 1969 with The Italian Job. Additionally, he directed 2 short films. From 1969 until August 1970, we have Eddie and the Waiters. The Best of Benny Hill, a compilation video that featured highlights from his early TV shows, was released in 1974. Some of Hill and #039's more well-known audio works include Peep and #039's Diary, Gather in the Mushrooms, and The Quickest Milkman in the West, which reached number 1 on the UK Christmas chart in 1971, was released in 1961, along with Harvest of Love the same year. Transistor Radio was released the same year. Ivor Novello Award winner in 1972 for Ernie Song. Many influential people hold Benny Hill in high regard. While on tour in the 1970s, Hill received applause from Michael Jackson, Adam Carolla, and Johnny Carson. In 1987, Genesis released a music video for Anything She Does, in which Hill portrayed the character Scuttle. The musician Snoop Dogg professed their love for Hill in 2011. While he was on set, Hill and #039's comedic timing was much praised by A-listers like Mickey Rooney, Michael Caine, Burt Reynolds, and countless more. His literary contemporaries Anthony Burgess and Charlie Chaplin both praised him as a humorous genius. Do you agree that Benny Hill is reminiscent to Charlie Chaplin? Among the many hit shows of the early 1970s on television was Benny Hill and #039's show. To an audience of millions all across the world. One thing that can be noted is that the show had characters that did physical humor in addition to notable sketches. In 1955, the show debuted on BBC television with shorter musical and comedic acts. From 1966 through 1968, Hill hosted the show for the BBC. In 1969, he moved it to Thames Television. Slapstick, mime, parody, and double entendre were all staples of the Benny Hill Show and #039's comedic repertoire. In 1971, the show and #039's peak viewership was over 21 million. Both the Best Writer and the Best Entertainment Performance BAFTA Television Awards were bestowed upon Hill for his efforts in 1972. It was in the 1970s that the show first gained a large American audience. Continued in syndicated form until 1991. Hill won the Rose d'Or in 1984, and it was nominated for 2 Emmys in 1980 and 1981. But in 1989, as a result of falling viewership and expensive production costs, roughly $555,000 per episode, or $1.75 million in 2024 dollars, Tim and #039's television decided to stop the show. The show and #039's impact lingered long after it ended. During the 2015 ITV special, its theme song was chosen as the most popular. The sound of ITV, the most beloved theme tune in the country. Viewers were entertained by the intriguing structure and captivating plotline of The Benny Hill Show. Benny Hill would appear in brief comedic sketches, and modern musicians would sometimes perform on the show. Hill would frequently don a vast array of outfits to portray a diverse cast of personas. Although there were complaints about sexism on the show, Hill justified it by arguing that it allowed the women to maintain their dignity while making the males appear dumb. Hill referred to the show and #039's style of fast-motion visual humor as "live animation", and it also made use of mime and parody. Typical episode finales included Hill being chased by someone, usually because of his shenanigans, to the accompaniment of the instrumental yakety sax, evoking the chases from the classic Keystone Cop series. Hill wowed crowds with his lightning-fast rhymes and one-take songs, and he also composed and performed structured music. As seen in his 1976 spoof, Murder on the Oregon Express, Hill was able to utilize television cameras creatively to create humorous illusions. To bring 1970s cops like Ironside and Kojak to life, he used techniques like imitation, editing, and camera angles. He has spent his career making fun of real-life and fictional American figures like W.C. Fields and others. Fields and Marlon Brando, as well as parodies of popular television series such as Starsky and Hutch, The A-Team, and $6 Million Man, which he dubbed the B-Team. Hill was known for her impersonations of a wide variety of personalities, including Michael Caine, Shirley Bassey, and newscaster Reginald Buzank, as well as foreign artists Miriam Makeba and Nana Muscuri. With Alan Wicker and Cliff Micklemore. His imitators were Tony Blackburn and Jimmy Savile of popular radio, Roger Whittaker of the band The Rolling Stones, Tony Hatch of the record company, and other politicians. Dennis Healy, Lord Boothby, and comedian Dave Allen were all cast. Even his former co-star Nicholas Parsons has been known to pull off impersonations from time to time. Parodying the show who and #039's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, the roles of Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor were portrayed by him. Yakety Sax, composed by James Q. Spider, Rich, and Boots Randolph, became an iconic part of the show and #039's closing tune. The Ladybirds, who had a successful acting career spanning 1969 to 1974, provided vocal support, and Ronnie Aldrich served as the musical director. In Aldrich and #039's rendition of Yakety Sax, which premiered in the 1969 episode that marked the show and #039's debut on Thames Television, Peter Hughes played the saxophone solo. In 1973 and 1974, Albert Elms took on the role of musical director for a couple of episodes. Yes, it and #039's The Benny Hill Show that was the characteristic upbeat introduction of the show, usually given by Henry McGee. Later on in the 1970s, Hill made his debut as the lad in his own right. With a salute that read, "Thank you for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you all again very soon," he would frequently finish the event. In the meantime, farewell. John Keefe, Henry McGee, Nicholas Parsons, Ken Said, Bob Todd, and Jackie Wright were the key cast members. Jenny Lee Wright, Diana Darby, Bettina LeBeau, Leslie Goldie, Cherry Gillum, and Sue Bond were among the regular female cast members, also known as sex spot women. Sue Upton, Louise English, and the Hills Angels dance group became regulars on the show later on. A brief appearance of Jane Leaves was made in the early 1980s. Maggie Streeter and the other female Ladybird singers often sang background vocals. Some of the character actresses were Bella Imberg, Anna Dawson, Rita Webb, Patricia Hayes, and Helen Horton. It is unknown why Benny Hill, despite his prominence, never tied the knot or started a family. Although specifics were not disclosed, two women, among them, actress Annette Andre, acknowledged turning down his approaches in the early 1960s. While speaking with Daily Mirror contributor Jane Dexter. To illustrate his point, Hill likened his experience trying to find a girlfriend to working in a chocolate factory, where the abundance of options made it tough to settle on just one. He claimed he was looking for an ordinary woman with common sense, like an office worker or factory worker. Or a sales associate. His romance with dancer Doris Steele was the one that came closest to marriage, but it terminated when she expressed her unreadiness for matrimony. In spite of his love problems, Hill was the target of sexuality allegations, which he vehemently refuted. He was very meticulous, stayed glued to his work, and put in many hours honing his writings and drawings. Regardless of his income. For 26 years, Hill made do with a cheap London apartment. In 1986, he moved to Fairway and #039's house near Teddington, but he still didn't and #039 buy a property, and he continued to rent. Because of his humble background, he thought of himself as an average guy. Thus, he chose for the easy things, cheap meals from the grocery, walking instead of hiring a cab, and fixing his clothing instead of buying new ones. Even though he had a driver and #039's license, he never had a car and lived a life of extreme austerity, more akin to an alchemist. Despite being shy, Hill was a natural in front of an audience. Combining his love of music with his sense of comedy, he brought an extra dimension of inventiveness to his comedic routines by including music, often parodies of popular songs, played on his saxophone. The Benny Hill Show would not have been as successful without his commitment to his work. Was Benny Hill, though, limited to that? Be sure to stay tuned to discover out. He was never gay, Benny Hill. Nonetheless, she became famous for her hilarious drag performances, where she portrayed personas such as Fanny Craddock, a toothy Moira Anderson, and all three Beverly sisters. His dread of women was one of his darkest characteristics, and little was known about his private life. Hill was talented, but he was painfully bashful and uncomfortable in female company. He constantly brought up two events from his youth that had an impact on his decision to remain a bachelor, one of which included a girl who refused to share her shells on the beach. In addition to the one where the fair girl wooed and #039 part with her sugar floss. These moments, he said, were so horrible that he should have lived alone forever. With the words end quote, I wouldn't and #039 do that, end quote, Hill acknowledged that he had followed the girls home but maintained that he had never spoken to them. It is arguable whether this conduct was chivalrous or disturbing, but it added to his life of isolation. Hill didn't and #039 like school and didn't and #039 have many friends, despite passing the 11+ exam when he was 10 years old. He promptly departed to take a position as a clerk at Southampton and #039's Phoenix Wharf and Coal Company. And subsequently unloaded trucks for Woolworths, where he had a secret crush on a girl named Jean working the perfume department, only to be rejected again. When Benny Hill was a delivery boy for Dorset Dairies, he fantasized about being the West and #039's fastest milkman and driving a wagon train. This fantasy became Ernie. He was honored with an Ivor Novello Award in 1972 for the song he composed describing his exploits. A former co-worker of Hill and #039's recalled that, in her younger years, Hill took solace in the nurturing touch of women. Hill, in contrast to Robin Asquith and #039's notorious sexual adventures, found that appearing in variety concerts and local programs was a great way to get noticed. Believing that being a clown would bring him universal adoration, he began performing jokes for a pitiful 5 shillings per night, thinking, that and #039's my life. His parents were not supportive of his ambitions to be a famous actor. In response to his mother and #039's advice, Alfie should secure a stable employment that provides a pension. You might deliver mail. Leaving the rat-infested air raid shelters behind, Hill made his way to London. In East Ham, he was able to secure a position as an assistant stage manager. When he watched the animals of Peppino and #039's Wonder Circus and Scylla and #039's dogs in painted backdrops, In addition to performing in blackface-required performances, filling in for inebriated performers, and mingling with homosexuals, conscientious objectors, and slackers, he found himself in a dazzling but dilapidated world. Despite his initial reluctance, Hill eventually served in the Army from 1942 to 1947 after being drafted. A time he despised, particularly during his conscription testing when he did poorly in an anti-aircraft searchlight unit. As he sought to launch a comedic career after the war, Hill lived off of the £52 he received as a demobilization bonus. He was a radio personality who did comedic calypsos, a Weston Supermare peer performer, and a Masonic dinner entertainer. During one concert, he began to sing and quote, "The I and #039, am so beautiful," end quote, but his performance was abruptly cut short due to an insult hurled by an audience member. He would brave the rain on his way to his gigs, sometimes even painting his gums crimson to give the illusion of whiter teeth. His time as Reg Varney and #039's assistant on Margate and Sunderland tours was a turning point. Hecklers made Hill and #039's already embarrassing attempts at a Chinaman conjuring act much worse. Maureen Risco, Benny and #039's dance instructor, recognized that he was unlucky in love. When she probed more, he reminisced about his youth spent at the beach, fairground, and Woolworth and #039's perfume counter while telling his usual tales of unrequited love. According to the available evidence, his most recent committed relationship took place in 1954 with Doris Deal, a chorus girl at Soho and #039's Windmill Theatre. Her demand for marriage, which he declined, ended their relationship, causing her to depart. In his grief, Hill appeared to take comfort in the knowledge that he had never truly had a love of his own. True love, he reflected in 1969, may be a terrible thing. A physical discomfort, nearly stifling, in the chest is how it feels. Benny Hill and #039's health began to decline in the mid-1980s, when he began to suffer from cardiac problems that affected his performance. February 1992 saw a minor heart attack for him. Despite the physicians and #039 advice to get a bypass, he still declined. Hill stayed dedicated to his business by appearing on TV even though his health was deteriorating. He was found dead in his Teddington apartment a few days after unidentified calls were made. He was 68 years old when he died on April 20, 1992. His burial took place in Hollybrook Cemetery close to Southampton, and his cause of death was determined to be coronary thrombosis. After hearing rumors that he was buried with riches, grave robbers broke into his coffin, but they did not find any goods. Benny Hill and #039's musical and entertaining legacy lives on, and his comedic work does as well. Want to know what happened to the Benny Hill Show? Keep watching to find out. People in the United Kingdom and more than 100 other nations, including the United States, enjoyed watching the Benny Hill Show. Hill rose to fame around the world because to the show and #039's many routines, which ran for more than 20 years until 1989 and featured racy songs, comedy, and chase sequences. Claims of misogyny and objectification were leveled at the show and #039's female characters, despite the show and #039's success. Claiming he wanted to make the males look stupid while keeping the women dignified, Hill defended his job. The Benny Hill Show and #039's comedic value was perceived differently at different points in time. As societal norms changed, Hill and #039's usage of explicit material came under fire. Despite the complaints, the show is nevertheless a landmark in television history, celebrated for its groundbreaking comedy ideas and enduring impact on popular culture. The show and #039's depiction of women was a major point of criticism, which led to its cancellation. Sexism and stereotyping, its detractors said, were to blame for the show and #039's dwindling viewership. Advertisers pulled their backing, causing Hill financial troubles, even though he justified his comedy as benign. Thames Television was unable to sustain the show due to declining audience and excessive production expenses, therefore it was cancelled. Another possible factor in the show and #039's cancellation was Hill and #039's strict creative control. It was too late to make changes to satisfy critics or follow TV trends after the cancellation. Thames opted to cancel the show despite Hill and #039's 039's previous success because of the difficulty she frequently caused with network officials due to her perfectionism. Although Hill and his supporters were let down, he had no choice but to embrace the outcome. How do you feel about Thames and #039 choice? The Benny Hill Show has a devoted fan base that loves Hill and #039's magnetic personality in the show and #039's distinctive brand of comedy. Turned the program into a hilarious comedy, which became a huge hit. Fred Scuttle, a charming and eccentric guy who seemed to be perpetually caught up in the most absurd of circumstances, was one of his most cherished creations. As a charming aside to Hill and #039's dentist, Fred Scuttle added to the show and #039's appeal. Hill had a hand in almost every aspect of the show and #039's creation, from writing sketches and music to directing and editing. After moving from the BBC to ITV and #039's Thames Television in 1969, the Benny Hill Show went from black and white to color. On November 19, 1966, Hill and #039's visual humor was taken to the next level with the first episode to air in color, Super Teach. Hill also had a significant impact in the film and music industries in addition to television. In 1991, he made his last visit in America with a TV special called Benny Hill World Tour New York. He passed away the following year. The special took place in the Big Apple and featured Hill and #039's trademark brand of slapstick, wordplay, and audience participation. His humorous skills, worldwide appeal, and hard work were all on display throughout this tour. In spite of his passing, Benny Hill and #039's comedic legacy lives on through his hit show, The Benny Hill Show, which is still widely watched and has cemented Hill and #039's position in television history. Shows including The Benny Hill Show have kept airing on channels like that and #039's TV and Channel 4, exposing both new and old viewers to his hilarious antics. Channel 4 included Hill in its Heroes series in 1998 to honor his influence on British comedy. A testament to his enduring impact is DJ Taylor and #039's 2002 ranking of him as the third greatest British comic of the 20th century. With its 2006 documentary, How Hilarious is Benny Hill Now? In an analysis that spanned several generations, a Channel 4 broadcast compared Hill and #039's comedic timing to that of contemporary sitcoms like Little Britain and the Catherine Tate broadcast. A noteworthy return to national television after nearly 20 years was announced in 2021 when Nat and #039's TV announced that The Benny Hill Show would air on their Christmas program. By distributing Hill and #039's iconic comedies to a larger audience, that and #039's TV hopes to keep his legacy alive. They have the rights to more than 40 hours of footage. As proof of Benny Hill and #039's lasting influence on the comedy world, The Benny Hill Show and #039's signature combination of musical comedy, slapstick, and satire continues to captivate audiences around the globe.